All right. Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. I've got a really interesting one today.
Yeah, looking forward to this.
So, tons of you have been sending in articles about this whole U.S.-China trade thing. It seems like everyone's kind of on edge about it.
For sure. Definitely a lot of tension brewing there.
Yeah, and people want to know what's the real deal here? Like, beyond the headlines, is this, are we talking like a full-blown trade war?
Well, the term's getting thrown around a lot. I mean, it's definitely escalated. US hits China with tariffs, China hits back. Classic tit for tat. But this time, I think the stakes are, even higher. We're not just talking economics here.
Right, exactly. Like we saw in some of the articles, this could impact, well, everything. Global supply chains, prices of goods. I mean, even stuff like, and this was something that kept coming up in the listener mail, fentanyl.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other layer to this.
Yeah, like what's the connection there? Is that really the reason behind these tariffs? I mean, some of the sources we've been looking at, they're saying maybe it's not so straightforward.
Yeah, there could be some ulterior motives at play.
For sure. And then there's this whole idea that, and this was a bit of a surprise, that China might actually be in a better position to weather this storm than they were, say, a few years ago.
Right, right. Their economy's shifted quite a bit.
Exactly. So much to unpack here, but before we get too deep into it, maybe you can give us a little bit of context. Like, what's the history of trade relations between these two superpowers? And why is this particular flare-up causing so much, well, frankly, anxiety?
Right. Well, first off, it's crucial to remember that trade tensions between the US and China, I mean, this isn't new. It's been a kind of a back and forth for decades, periods of, cooperation, then retaliation, then back again.
So kind of like a dance they've been doing for a while.
Exactly. A very high stakes stance. But, and this is a big but, this time it feels different. Like I said, the stakes are higher. We've got the war in Ukraine, which is adding all this uncertainty to the global landscape.
Right, so everything's just way more uh, volatile.
Ex-
Okay, so let's dive into some specifics. Fentanyl's a big one that our listeners are asking about. And for those who need a refresher, it's a super potent synthetic opioid. The U.S. is saying, at least officially, that it's the main reason they slapped these tariffs on China. They're saying they want China to crack down on fentanyl exports. We're talking about a 10% tariff initially on like $14 billion worth of Chinese goods.
Wow.
Yeah. And of course, China didn't just sit back. They hit back with tariffs of their own, specifically targeting U.S. energy exports and farm equipment.
See, that's what I mean about strategic. That's not random. They're going after industries that they know could really hurt the U.S., American producers, global markets, the whole nine yards.
Right, like a pressure point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, tariffs on Chinese goods, well, that could mean higher prices for everyone, basic economics. Add a tax to imported goods, those costs get passed down the line.
Which means you and I end up paying more at the checkout.
Sadly, yeah, that's often how it works.
Okay, so fentanyl. Is it really the big bad wolf here?
Yeah.
Because one of the sources we came across, a Chinese expert, he had a really interesting take, and I'm just going to quote him directly here. Fentanyl is an issue that can easily be addressed. China has already been cooperating with the U.S. side on this. So the U.S. probably wants something more that they cannot publicly talk about. I mean, that's pretty bold.
It is. And it really speaks to this idea of hidden agendas, right? You start to look at the timing, these tariffs popping up while the war in Ukraine is raging.
It does make you wonder.
It does. I mean, the U.S. has been putting a lot of pressure on China to distance itself from Russia. So is it possible they're using these tariffs as leverage, trying to influence China's stance on the war? I mean, it's definitely within the realm of possibility.
So we're talking about geopolitics now, not just trade.
Exactly. It's all intertwined.
Okay, so what about the potential fallout from all of this? We saw some pretty dire predictions, like one from a Goldman Sachs economist who said that if these tariffs keep escalating, China's GDP could take a serious hit.
Yeah, that was a pretty bleak outlook. But, and this is important to note, we also came across an opposing view from a Chinese expert who argued that China is actually in a stronger position now than in past trade wars.
Interesting.
Yeah, they pointed to how China's been working on diversifying its economy. They're less reliant on exports to the U.S. than they used to be.
So they've got more options.
Exactly. And this expert even suggested that, in the end, it might be American consumers who bear the brunt of this. Higher prices and all that, especially with inflation already being a major concern.
Oof. Not what anyone wants to hear.
Oh,
And then there's this other factor that we found super interesting. Chinese companies moving their operations overseas.
no?
What's the impact of that on all of this?
Huge impact, potentially. I mean, if goods are being produced outside of China, then those U.S. tariffs, they wouldn't even apply. It just shows how incredibly complex and interconnected the global economy is. You try to target one thing, and there are all these ripple effects you might not even anticipate.
Right, like a butterfly effect.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's try to sum this up. We've got these rising trade tensions between the U.S. and China, and it's not 100% clear if fentanyl's the real driving force, or if there's more to the story.
Right. Could be a smokescreen.
Exactly. Both countries are playing hardball, strategically targeting industries to, inflict maximum pain, and figuring out who's going to come out on top, or even if anyone comes out on top, well, that's a real head-scratcher. Too many variables, global economies, a tangled web, and all that.
Totally. And I think the important thing for everyone listening is to think about the bigger picture here. Like, how might this trade war, if that's what we're calling it, how might it affect other countries? What about you personally? Will it impact the price of your electronics, clothes, food even? I mean, the story's just getting started, and the impact could be pretty widespread.
It's a lot to think about. Well, thanks so much for breaking this all down for us.
My pleasure. Always happy to dive deep.
And for all of you listening, keep those stacks of articles coming our way. We love getting your requests and exploring these complex issues with you. Until next time, stay curious.